So thank you for coming here and for being willing to tell your story about what you brought for us.
Well, thank you. This is really very much coming home for me. I was born here in Anacortes and grew up in the schools here and actually in 1960 we moved into the house immediately next door to the museum here. And so, of course, it was the library at that time. So I grew up spending about as much time in the library, especially the basement, where Mrs. Wright was the children's librarian. And then later, when we moved the library from here to the remodeled old hospital, I was involved in, I can't tell you how many books I packed and such, and was excited not only because of the library move, but because of the fact that this had been designated as the new museum property. And so immediately at that time, I got involved. Of course, I was involved with Ann Biesner and Marie Hateman and Bill Gallagher and others who were involved in the museum board at that point. And we came in and we painted and tore out bookshelves and did this and that and everything else. One point that I will never forget, if you look at the top of these 4 pillars, at that scroll work up there, you'll see the gold work that's done on there. That is real gold leaf that was painted on there by Ann Biesner. And I remember being in here, and she was up in years at that point in time, and had a ladder, and I was holding my breath as she would climb up, and she wouldn't let anybody else do it, but she had to paint all of that gold leaf on every one of those. So every time I come in, I look at that to check to make sure it wasn't painted over by someone who didn't understand how important and valuable that is. So anyway, I really don't have any prepared comments, but just to give you just a little background about this, I was in the 6th grade when one of my classmates, Brian McKee, was a good friend of mine, and I spent a lot of time at his house. And he was the son of Don and Billy McKee. Well, at that point, Billy was working on a script for a historical pageant about the founding of Anacortes that she was putting together for the Campfire Girls. And remember that?
Girl Scouts.
Oh, was it Girl Scouts? Okay, Girl Scouts. I was partially correct. Anyway, she was working on that and busy writing and getting stuff. And I was fascinated by what she was doing, and she dropped some little tidbits about that. And then when the pageant was actually put on, I was there and I saw the whole thing, and I was just captivated by some of the stories of Amos Bowman and the Samish Indians and the background of all this. And I decided I was going to do my own research on that. Now, I was in the 6th grade, and so I talked to my teacher at that time, was Don Dixon. Some of you will know Don. He still lives here in the community. And I'd hoped to be able to get him here today, but his health is not such that he could do that. But he said, he encouraged me and told me that it would be an extracurricular activity and such. I don't know if he had any great expectations out of it. But he encouraged me to do that, and so I did. I set out and I actually wrote up what I think was for a sixth grader was a pretty fine accomplishment, and put that together. And he liked it so much that he took it to the office secretary at Whitney School and had her type it on Ditto Masters and made copies of the thing. And I brought for the museum today a copy of that very first report on Anacortes by Dan Wollam. And on the inside, I dated it August 6, 1959. So this was really my start on Anacortes history. And even as a sixth grader, as I started writing this, I got interested. It kind of captivated me. And I developed this real interest in history. And Billy McKee talked to me, and I met Wally Funk at about that time when I was in the sixth grade, and he was interested in this, and he took me to his home and started showing me photos and things that he had and talking about it. And I started hanging out down at the Anacortes American and discovered that they had in a loft upstairs, they had a couple hundred old images on zinc plates that they had used in years, and they were just tossed up there in a haphazard way. And I started looking through those, and I said, "These are wonderful. Can we make copies of these in prints?" So Bob Fader was the printer at that time, and I brought him down, and Bob used a proof press, and he would ink them up and printed them off on papers for me, and I had developed a pretty good collection of copies of the photos of that. Well, that really got me more and more interested, and about that time I met Gene Lohman. Now, I got to tell you, if there was ever an icon of history to captivate a young mind here, it was Gene Lohman. Just like everybody's grandmother, and just up the street from where we lived here, and of course I met her, and she started telling me about the history of Anacortes and about her husband and the Lohman family and all of this. And then one day she said, "I got something I want to show you." And she went to a cupboard and she opened it up and she pulled out an envelope, and it had some string in it. And she said, this is the string that was stretched across Deception Pass Bridge on the day that it opened. And she said, this is the string that was cut when we opened that bridge. And she said, I asked for it and I got to keep it. And she said, that just really, if there was anything to catch a young man at that point, it was that string. And I can't tell you how many times I asked her to bring that out so I could look at it and feel it again, to have that tangible feel of history, and to appreciate all of that. But Jean did another thing for me at that point. Jean was a member of the DAR, and she started talking to me about her genealogy, and she had a great big scroll that she unrolled, and it showed her family connections, the Perry family, and all the way back into Ohio many, many generations past that. And she started talking to me about genealogy and then how people were related to other people here in Anacortes and the Lohman family and everything. And I just, now in addition to Anacortes history, I am hooked on genealogy. And I determined I was going to trace my family history because I wanted to have a chart just like she had. And so she helped me get started. She gave me pointers and told me how to record it and everything. This, of course, was long before we had computers. And so I ended up with stacks of envelopes and pieces of paper and letters and newspaper clippings and everything all jumbled together. But I worked on that starting from about that point. So this is back in about 1960, 61, 62, in that time range. I worked on that for a long time, and between Billy McKee and Wally Funk and Gene Lohman and probably a few others at that time, they started giving me names of other pioneers. Said, well, you should go and visit so-and-so. And such, and I said, okay, I'd love to. And I got the idea of doing oral history. And technology, I was just explaining earlier, technology, it wasn't quite as refined back in the early 60s, but I thought I was going to use state-of-the-art technology. So I begged my mother, and she went down to video electronics downtown, and we picked out a great big reel-to-reel tape recorder, heavy old thing. And I lugged that around, and we began setting up appointments with different families and different individuals around town, and I would go. I'm just by this point seventh grader, basically. I wasn't real sophisticated in my interviewing technique. But I sometimes, Ann Biesner would go with me, or someone else would go, and she knew how to get people started telling stories. And she would kind of smirk afterwards and said, he would be embarrassed if he knew that was on tape, and such. And that's exactly why she got it prodded. Well, I started pulling all those together. And then by the time I was in junior high school, I'd had all these connected activities that I had done and information. When I was in junior high school, the 7th or 8th grade in that era, the Washington State Legislature passed a law that required a semester of local history to be taught as a requirement for graduation in the state. And I was in the 8th grade, I was elected student body president, and so I had a good relationship with Herb Ryberg, who was the principal at that time, and we talked about that, and there was what are we going to do? We don't have anything to teach local history. There are no books and such. So I thought, by the end of my 8th grade year, as summer was starting, I needed a project, and I decided, okay, I'll develop a book for local history. I know a lot of local history, and I'll develop it. Well, I had no idea of how to put a book together. or what to do, but I talked with different people about it. I talked with June Williams, who was the editor of the American at that time, and I had lots of newspaper clippings that I had, and all those photos that were upstairs in the American building, and I asked permission from her to put it together in a book. Well, she said, sure, you can do that, and she wrote me out a little letter and signed it and said I had the permission to have access to anything the American had and to go ahead. And she may have thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. So I started putting this book together that you now see as Anacortes Story, and I didn't write it. I took these old newspaper articles and pulled them together and matched them with photos and put them together. And as I was putting all this together, I know the American was getting concerned because I told him I wanted to print it. But I didn't have any money to print anything like that. So one day they called me, when I was down there, they called me into the office, and Leighton Wood, who was the publisher of the Skagit Valley Herald at that time and owned the American, called me over, and he wanted to talk to me about this and how much it was going to cost to print this, and that they were willing to work with me, but if I signed a contract to print it, I was going to have to be able to pay for it. So I started thinking about that and decided that I could raise the money by selling advertising in the back of the book. So I added to my labors going up and down the street and stopping at businesses that I've known and people that I knew, and I sold ads for $5, $10, and a really big one for $25. And back at that time, that was more money than what you could imagine. But I raised the money to print 500 copies of that, and when I did, we finished it just the day before the Arts and Crafts Festival opened that year, and they got me a little stand out in the middle of the intersection down there at 7th Street and Commercial, and I started hawking my books for $1.50 or maybe $1.25, I think, at a copy, and I sold a lot. And then while I was doing that, the school superintendent dropped by. His name escapes me right now. Huh?
Was it Henning?
No.
Parnell Johnson?
No. It'll come to me. But he stopped by the booth and congratulated me, and he said, I want to buy 40 copies. We're going to use them in the school. And they ended up buying more than that, but they now had material to use in teaching their local history class as required by the state. So you can imagine when I was a freshman, 9th grade, walked in very first day of school, and I'm assigned to one of my classes is the local history class. And I walked in, and my teacher at that point, before class started, and I think it was the first period of the day, he said, Dan, come over here. And he took me off to the side, and he had one of my books, and he said, Dan, you've already earned your grade for the class. but he said, I'd appreciate it if you did the work anyway. So I said, great. So rather than being the end of my historical quest, it opened up a whole other chapter. Now I can need to pursue it even more as a student to validate my grade that I already had. That book attracted a lot of attention, and as I look back on it, it's easy for me to be a little amazed at how much it did, because I really did not write much of this. There were a couple of the chapters or stories in here that I did write, but most of it was just taking newspaper stories and matching them with photos and putting them together. It's only been in later years that I've really appreciated that was a rather significant thing for an 8th grader to do, to put all of that together and get it published and distributed and everything. And kind of surprises me when I look back and I think about those years. It attracted a lot of attention. Governor came to town on other business, but a copy was presented to the governor and such, and then Congressman Lloyd Meads, and I have at home framed on my wall a page from the Congressional Record where Congressman Meads told the story of Dan Wollam and his historical research and work that he was doing at that time. Now, along with this, at the same time, starting in the 8th grade, another chapter of my life that became intertwined with this, I decided I wanted to work in city government. And so towards the end of the year in my 8th grade, as summer was approaching, I set up an appointment. I got on the phone and I called and I made an appointment with Earl Diller, who was city manager at that time. And I went down to City Hall. I sat down with him at his desk and he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I would like to work in city government." And he looked at me and he said, "You're just 14 years old." He said, you can't operate machinery, and mowing lawns and things would not be something we could do. And I said, mowing lawns is not what I had in mind. I want to work in City Hall. And he said, he said, you're free to come in and hang out and work. So every day after school and every day all day long during summer, I went down to City Hall and I started to work. I worked there for about 3 years for nothing. Just they assigned me to clean out storerooms and such. As I did, I began to look at old papers from the city. I found the old ordinances that established the seal for the city, which was the first ordinance that was passed by the city. I found other old paperwork. They showed me an old vault upstairs in the old mayor's office that nobody had been in for a long time, and they gave me the combination to it. And I went in and I pulled out all these old minute books of council meetings and things, and I started reading, and I started getting acquainted with names like Frank Hogan and Mayor Sharpstein and other names from back there, and it just fascinated me. And I would go in and I would spend hours reading the minutes, handwritten minutes of these old council meetings. After a while, it sort of began to feel like I knew these people, like they were friends. And I began to see some personalities emerging from reading those documents and pulling them together. And then I discovered that the Anacortes American had all of their old newspapers, bound copies of them, and I put it together that I could take the date of a city council meeting over here and the minutes that I read, and I could go over across the street to the Anacortes American, and I could actually open up the newspaper that reported on that council meeting, and I could compare them, and I could see how things began to work and how the city began to fit together. I can't tell you, I can't really express how it began to feel over time like this was family, and how it was almost like I knew these people, and they were family, and that thought persisted with me for many years. I continued to read and to meet people and be involved. Was involved with setting up the museum and originally, and I am so proud of what the museum has accomplished here today. So far beyond anything that we could have imagined at that time, and such. It just really thrills me. I won't tell you. I can tell you I don't have it anymore, but I had a key to that door for many years. Even after I was married, I had a key that I could come in, and sometimes I did. Sometimes I just came in late at night or sometime and just look around and just feel the history and feel some of the people that are here. So after, of course, I got married and jobs, and my jobs took me from Anacortes to Seattle, and then to the Midwest to Indiana, and then back to Oregon, and then back to Washington, Port Angeles area, Port Townsend, and then back to Oregon again, then to Arizona and back. And over those years, of course, people, the population began to change here in Anacortes, and so many of the people, Traftons and Lomans and other names, so many of those people were no longer alive. One of the real thrills that I had was one time when I came back, I stopped to see Jean Loman, and as you know, she lived, I think, to be 103. And I stopped to see her, and by that point she was blind and bedfast, but she knew me, and we reminisced about the old times and about her trying to teach me the cello in between everything else and such, and that was a real thrill. So as the years passed, I didn't do a lot of assembling of materials that I had. My wife can tell you that I continued to keep boxes of materials, and I told you how we moved from Anacortes to Seattle to Indiana to Oregon to Washington to Arizona to Oregon. Those boxes of materials moved with us every time. And sometimes there were new things that were added. But a few years ago, as I was preparing to retire, maybe about 10 years ago now, I started to assemble my materials together. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it or why or how, but I started sorting through things. I suppose part of it was because I was under a little bit of pressure to reduce the stockpile of stuff. And so I began to organize and put things together. And over the last 10 years, that began to grow and grow. And one day I was up and stopped in to visit here at the museum and met Elaine, last name? Walker. And we talked about some things, and she was great in updating me on what the museum was doing, and the idea began to grow on me that I wanted to put another book together, and I wanted to tell the story of the important people in the history of the city and the development here. And as I began to think about it and started writing some things, I developed in my mind what I wanted to do was to share what I felt about all of these founding people that came to this little city by the sea. And I didn't want it to be a story of events. Most histories that are written are event-oriented. I want to tell the story of the founding of the city. Well, I don't want to tell the story of the founding. I want to tell the story of the founders as individuals. Who were these people? Who was Henry Villard? Who were these Amos Bowman and these people? And what inspired them as individuals to come together and to make this community. About that time, I was doing some research on my family, and quite by accident, a name popped up on the screen in a distant relationship, the name of Bowman. And Amos Bowman. That's strange. So I did a little more checking. Well, it wasn't a real close relationship, but it was a genuine relationship, I found. And so I added Amos Bowman to my computer in my family tree. And then I got to thinking, well, what about some of the others? So then I started taking other names and tracing other genealogies of some of these early day founders. And I found, if I trace them back far enough, I'm going to find where they overlap and connect with my ancestry. So that's what I started to do. The books that you see here contain 149 individuals that I have done that with. They were people significant in one way or another to the founding of Anacortes. Some of them are names that you wouldn't think would think of as being necessarily part of the Anacortes history, like George Vancouver. But I got to tell you, you start researching George Vancouver and what he did, and you find out that was pretty significant. There are some really interesting things here. And Peter Puget and others, so I included them. Then I decided, well, I want to take a list of the mayors. So I started my list of mayors, and I up through your last mayor here, Lori Gear. She was the 50th mayor of the city. Not that there were 50 terms, but 50 different individuals. Some of them, like Jim Rice, served more than one term. Frank Hogan served 3 terms as different terms. but there were 50 individuals. So I started researching each one of them. And I was determined that I would find a relationship to each one. Thus far, I have been able to, up through Lori Gear, not counting the current mayor, I have traced a relationship to all but one mayor. And I don't have photos of everyone, and some of the relationships you might scoff at a little bit, sort of like the uncle of my cousin's first wife's brother, sort of thing. But I could trace it on paper, and if I could trace it on paper and document my sources, I counted that as a relationship. So I have done all of those. I have to tell you that coming here today is kind of bittersweet. It feels really good to work on a project now for going on 60 years and to feel like I've completed something. That's a really good feeling. But it's also kind of a sense of loss. And I think, there's so much more that I wanted to do. And I've turned over to the museum files on at least 2 more volumes of names that I have started research on, but I have not completed the work that I have done. I'm now in my 70s, and as many of you I know have already done, you realize that it's going to be up to the next generation to pick up and complete and move on with the work. And I can assure you that there's still work to be done. There's still wonderful, wonderful stories to tell. Stories about the very first ferries from here to British Columbia, to Sydney, and Harry Crosby, and the work that he did. There's stories about the prison quarry at Deception Pass and the riot that was there. There's stories about the mayor that stole money and got himself into a lot of hot water and had to resign. There's almost any kind of story that you could imagine wrapped up in these individuals. And Mr. Lunsford, I am turning over to you this work that I've done. It's not published. I don't think there aren't many people who would want to pay the cost that would have to be to buy a 5-volume set of books, and especially tracing Dan Wollam's genealogy. But my hope is that this can be a research tool for others, and even more than that, I hope it can be an inspiration to other people to continue to record history. And I have to conclude with one other comment of appreciation. I want to read the dedication that I have put in here, because I in thinking about it, I decided there was a threefold dedication. If I could be so presumptuous as to want to dedicate the work that I've done. And so what I've written, it says, in gratitude to the Anacortes Museum of History, its board of trustees, employees, and volunteers who over the years have labored consistently to preserve for future generations our heritage of community. In appreciation to the Anacortes American, since 1891, this community's principal journal, a record of the daily lives, events, triumphs, and disasters which, when blended together, create a sense of belonging and accomplishment. And with admiration to the pioneers, visionaries, and ordinary citizens who explored the waters, cleared the forests, made the bricks, built the buildings, laid the track, and had the audacity to believe in the future. This work is dedicated. I call it Anacortes Kin. I think that emphasizes the sense of family that I felt in putting it together. And just like my own family, and when I think about those that are my blood relatives, subtitled The Explorers, Founders, Visionaries, Scoundrels, and Leading Citizens. And forgive my scattered approach to what I've shared this morning, but there's a quote that I put on the open page of this, quote that goes back to the year somewhere in the years probably 40 to 50 AD. Pliny the Elder, one of the world's all-time greatest historians, and whose work has been lost, but was used by Plato and others. And a quote attributed to Pliny is, "It is a noble employment to rescue from oblivion those who deserve to be remembered." And that really, I think, has become the theme of what I've done. These individuals, some of them are names that you'll know and right away who they are. Some of them are names of people that you've probably never heard of, but were in one way or another significant to this town. That's been the theme of my book. If there are any questions
Well, before the questions come, I just want to say thank you for the generous gift and for this sharing it all with us. And we are, I can say for myself, I am inspired. So you met that goal. I'm sure everybody here is. And I just short thank yous to my museum staff and past and present and volunteers, as you mentioned in your dedication. But especially Linda Yerby for setting up this event, and Cora Nerona for filming it, and Eric Anderson, our curator of collections, who's going to be coordinating the intake and entry into the database, and everyone else. So thanks everyone for coming, and now just whatever questions you have for Dan.
I'm curious, when did you graduate?
I graduated in 1969.
Okay. Thank you.
Seems like an awful long time ago.
I want to know how you transitioned from reading meeting minutes to being able to do all this research. How research is so tricky now because there are so many resources to look for.
Yeah.
What are your 5 to 10 top resource places? I'd love to know.
I think the most important resource was people, and that's something that doesn't exist like it used to. Unfortunately, people don't live forever, but there's nothing like sitting down with someone in their home, by the fire, and getting them to tell stories about what they remember and what they experienced, and so that has to be my number one resource. The number two, I think, is probably something I was born with. I don't know, but I've always loved history. I just want to know, and so that curiosity prompted me to go from one thing to the next. I would read something, and then I would think, well, then that means this is connected to that, or this person, or something else. And so there was always this connection to lead on to something else. And in that process, I would discover things that I never would have thought to ask for before. I remember those early years at City Hall. We had storerooms that had been filling up with boxes of papers and things from the time the city took it over from the Elks back in the about 1913, 1914, somewhere back then. And as I'd go through those boxes, I found boxes of arrest warrants. And I'd start going through those, and I'd say, well, I know that name. And I won't tell you what names those were, but then I'd read that and think, oh, that's interesting. And then I found court records, and I found all kinds of other things at that time, and voter registration records from World War I and such, all those things, and it led to people and tied things together. So that sense of curiosity opened up things. I found a stash in City Hall of the old original ordinances. Nobody else knew that they had existed. They were just stuck away in a box, probably 150 or 200 of the earliest ordinances that the city had. They didn't give me much guidance on things, but I knew those needed to be saved. And so I don't know. Those are probably the main ones. The newspaper was certainly an invaluable resource. And in my early years, I went to the American, and I would spend hours reading. They had the old Enterprise newspapers there too, and reading those and the stories that they told was an important resource, and still is. And then finally, in more recent years, the state of Washington has had a project to put newspapers online. And while it's not 100% complete, they're still chipping away at that progress. It's a wonderful project. I should tell the museum staff there are some articles in here that, because of the way they were photographed on that state project, were unreadable in certain words and such. So I would tell an article, and then I'd leave 4 stars for you guys to fill in when you look at the original newspapers. Yes?
I was wondering what happened to those original reel-to-reel tape recordings that you'd done as a
I really don't know. About the time that I graduated from high school, I know I took a big box of those, and I gave them, I won't mention them in the name, but right here, but I gave them to an individual who was a member of the museum board. And I don't know what happened to them after that. I know where they were for a while, but I wish I had them. I wish I I did Traftons and Robinsons and just a whole Lomans, everything, just wonderful, wonderful stories.
Yeah.
I really believe in oral history, and you have no excuse anymore not to capture them on video now and to keep them and record them. That's a really, really important project.
Can you point at the camera and say that?
The reel-to-reel got a little smaller.
Yes, well, thank you all for coming. You're free to come up and to browse through these. I don't know how the museum's going to handle them, but you've got the. Isn't it incredible? All this more than a half century of work and production and everything is all contained on that little thing, and so you can print off as many copies as you want.
Thank you very much.
Yes.